Good morning, everyone. Welcome to an all-new On the Mark TV and radio from Westfield Community Programming, 89.5 FM WSKB, and our media partners at Southwick Community Television and Agawam Media. I'm your host, Mark Auerbach. Our first guest today is a regular visitor here to On the Mark, Claire Morenon from the Community Involved in Sustaining Agriculture, better known as CISA. And if you see those little signs at your farmers markets or the locally grown sections of your supermarket's produce section, and you see these buy local signs, that's part of the effort that CISA does in making sure that our local crafts producers and farmers get their produce and their supplies and everything else out into the community. Claire, spring is in the air. And as I'm driving around, it seems like people are planting.
Yes, it is that time of year. I think we are just about at our final frost date for the region. I mean, that's always an estimate, but we are getting to the point where it's safe to put plants outside. So farmers have been working in their greenhouses, getting seedlings going for months now, and very, very soon the main harvest season is going to begin.
What is the first crop that people generally get every year?
Well, we always say that the first crop is maple syrup, which comes in February, March, depending on the year. So we're through that season. The first thing that tends to come out of the ground is rhubarb, which maybe is less exciting than the next one, which is asparagus. And that, I think, is the real marker of spring for a lot of people in the valley. Like the asparagus is here. It's really delicious. It's one of the sort of hallmark crops of our region, and it means that the growing season has begun in earnest.
And a lot of people call it Hadley grass. And the
Yes.
farms along the Connecticut River are that what they produce goes to New York and Boston, the finest restaurants around. How did we become asparagus producers?
I don't know if I know the history. I think that for some reason, um, I mean, our soils here, especially along the Connecticut River, are famous for being extremely fertile. It's really great agricultural land, and that's part of why CISA, along with a lot of other organizations throughout the region, land trusts and that sort of thing, have worked to help preserve agricultural land because we are really blessed here in the valley to have land that is really productive, and maintaining it and keeping it open feels very important. So I think that people plant all sorts of things, and one of the things that really took off early was asparagus. And famously, asparagus was shipped overseas, to the queens of England and that sort of thing throughout history. So the area remains pretty well known for growing really great asparagus. And I agree. I love asparagus and I look forward to it every year, and it is really delicious.
And there's just a short window of time in May and June when the local asparagus is at its peak. And
Yes.
I mean, they're on farm stands everywhere in local markets, and it's really something that is specific to the Pioneer Valley.
Yes. And our CISA's website, which is buylocalfood.org, we have an online guide that you can use to search for individual crops like asparagus. You can search that way, find out who's growing it, who's selling it. You can also search for farm stands, farmers markets, restaurants that buy local, that sort of thing. Or you can just enter in your zip and see what's around you for local food and local farms. So that is a great resource if you don't already have your go-to asparagus spot. I don't know, do you have a favorite place that you like always look for each
Yeah,
year?
there's a farm stand just over. I live on the Mass Connecticut line, and there's a farm stand maybe a quarter of a mile over the line, which is my go-to often.
Yeah.
But I've had great asparagus coming from the local supermarkets that have been harvested in Hadley.
Yes. Yeah, there are a lot of grocery stores that do a really great job sourcing local food from local farms. And the ones that work with CISA that are part of our Local Hero program are listed on our website and are findable there.
One of the things I spent the winter doing, because I was out of commission from January until March 20th. I watched a lot of YouTube videos, and foraging videos kept showing up in my feed, and I
Interesting.
learned about ramps, which are
Yeah.
of a local product. It sort of tastes like a cross between garlic and onions. They're one of the first crops that are in the farmers markets.
That's true. Yeah. Ramps, I think, they're a little bit of a controversial food when it comes to foraging because it's really easy to over forage them. They grow and spread really slowly. So they grow, wild in the woods. And I think historically there have been lots and lots of ramps, but they've gotten kind of trendy in recent years. You'll see them on restaurant menus, often in the form of ramp butter, which is just sort of butter infused with ramps. And they're really tasty. And it's important to make sure that you're looking for sustainably harvested ramps. That's the tip that I would give to anyone who's interested in tasting them, making sure that whoever harvested them is very conscientious about making sure that they're not harvesting so much that they won't continue to grow in that spot in future years because they have been abundant historically, but they can be over harvested and diminished in the wild.
And they're a crop. I shouldn't say a crop because they grow wild, but from New England all the way down into the deep south. When I lived in Washington, people would go foraging for ramps. It was the first vegetable of the season.
Yes, right. Yeah, that's true. They do come really early. Yeah.
How many farms do you provide services to in Western Mass?
Well, our local hero membership is sort of the baseline way that farms interact with us, so they can join, and that's a way for them to get connected to our resources. We also work with many other farms throughout the state and throughout the region. So I think the number of farms that we have provided technical assistance to, so expert resources or grant funds or help applying for grants, those sorts of things, is around 200 or 375 over the last year. There are a lot of farms here in the Connecticut River Valley and the surrounding region, maybe more than might be visible to people just driving around. And the types of services that we provide really run the gamut. So we provide marketing help and, like I said, connection to grant resources and other funding. And we provide help with business planning and assessing people's market mix and whether or not that's going to work for them, and help with making sure that people adhere to labor laws and that sort of thing. So farms really, for all their expertise growing food, farmers themselves have quite a range of skills on the business side, and many of them can use, expert assistance to make sure that their businesses remain viable, and to make sure that they are accessing all the resources that are available to them. So that's a really, really big part of what CISA does.
And I understand there are some farms that are struggling right now in Western Mass. Last summer's high heat and humidity, the flooding that's happening right now along the Connecticut River is impacting farms. And a farmer that I had talked to said that if our farm goes under and we can't sustain it, then developers will come in and put up track houses. And once it becomes a subdivision, you can never get that farm back.
Yeah, that is really all true. Last year was uh, a very difficult year for farms of all sorts. We started the season with some deep freezes that totally decimated the peach crop, not just here, but throughout all of New England. And the reason for that, I've come to understand, wasn't that it was unusual for us to have a freeze in the early spring. That's common historically. But as our winters have gotten more mild because of climate change, it means that the trees are not hardened off the way that they need to be in order to be able to withstand really cold snaps in the early spring. So that's just part of what's happening with the changing climate, is that certain fruit trees are going to have off years, and that makes it a lot harder for farms to plan long term and to ensure their viability. So we lost the peaches, and then there was another freeze later that didn't totally destroy but damaged apples and blueberry crops. And then in July, we had widespread river flooding that damaged tens of thousands of acres of crops. I mean, destroyed them. July was right at the beginning of the big harvest push. So it meant that all of the work and inputs and money that had gone into production up until that point for those farms that were affected was just completely wiped out in one day. Um, and we just had rain throughout the rest of the season. So even farms that weren't flooded by the rivers, huge amounts of rain make it really hard to get into your fields, to take care of them, to harvest, all of that. So I think there are a lot of farms that are coming into this year, having had a very difficult year last year, who really need a good year in order to keep going. And I'll also say that the amount of resources and help that was made available to farms last year, CISA was part of, this network of support that fell into place to make sure that the affected farms at least had some resources to help make them whole. And that was really amazing and gratifying to see. But yeah, I think it's true that once farmland is developed, it doesn't go back to being farmland. So that's part of why it feels really important to make sure that there is a safety net for farms to help them through difficult times, and also why it's so important for people to buy local and keep them going so that that land remains open and productive and they can keep growing food for all of us.
People right now are talking about buying a farm share for the summer.
Yes.
Can you explain how that works?
Yeah, so a farm share, it's also called CSA, Community Supported Agriculture, not to be confused with CISA, which is the organization that I work for, very confusing. But basically the way it works is the traditional model is with a vegetable farm. And so you commit upfront to buying a share of the harvest from that one farm. Sometimes you pay all at once at the beginning of the season. That can be really beneficial to the farm because it means that they don't have to take out loans in order to do the startup for the year. But many also accept payment plans throughout the season. So you commit upfront, pay or don't, depending on how it works. And then you get a usually weekly distribution, which is a share of everything that that farm has grown, and everything that they have in season. And I think it can be really great if you like to eat lots of vegetables and try new things. It can be really great, especially for families with kids, a fun way to connect your children to what's in season and have them go with you to the farm and see things growing. That can be a good way to encourage them to be a little bit more experimental. Um, and it's great for the farm because it means that they can spend less time throughout the season on marketing and selling their products and more time focused on growing it.
And you generally don't get a choice in your weekly farm box of what you're getting, but you get what is being harvested that week. And I always found we have a farm share, and I always found that the produce was extremely fresh. Plus, there were things I had never tasted before, like garlic scapes or
Yeah.
ground cherries, which grow here in Western Mass. I had no idea what they were, and so I ended up with the farm share sampling new kinds of food.
Yeah, I think that it's really great for that. And the way that it's set up depends a lot on which farm you choose. If you live near the farm, many of them you can go to the farm, pick up your box yourself. And in that case, many of them you do have some choice in terms of what you take. But right, it's going to be whatever's in season. So that means that you have to wait until July or August to get tomatoes, or until the fall to get your butternut squash. Um, and everything that you get is going to be super fresh. And it's a great way to sort of connect with the seasons and like ride along with the rhythm of what's in season and what's growing in the region. Yeah.
And chefs and foodies and nutritionists always say eat in season. The apple that you're finding in the store right now may have been harvested last September and kept in cold storage, but the celery that you may buy in a couple of weeks was just harvested. So
Hmm.
when you eat something that's seasonal, it tastes better, and you really that's the time to buy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think CSAs or farm shares can be a really great option. I think it's worth giving it a shot if that interests you. And I would also say that, if committing to a weekly pickup or committing to one particular farm seems like too much of a commitment, there are excellent farm stands and farmers markets and grocery stores selling local. So there are lots of ways to do exactly that, to look for what's in season and buy it from local farms.
We have a terrific farm stand, a farmer's market every Thursday. And I just think that the produce is fabulous, but they also have other things like baked goods. Um,
Mhm.
the particular farm stand that we have, they have cultivated mushrooms of a variety of things that you don't see in the supermarket. And I really enjoy seeing what they're bringing in that morning that was picked either the day before or that morning before they bring it into town.
Yeah. Yeah. The way that I cook, which, is maybe not for everyone, but I like well, I have a CSA share in the summer. So I am sort of starting from a place of like, what's in my fridge and what can I make with this rather than starting with a recipe and then going shopping for it. And similarly, going to the farmer's market and seeing what looks interesting or what looks really tasty can be a fun way to expand your recipe repertoire and to try new foods. I find that to be kind of an enjoyable challenge, but
For sure, for sure. Are there any unusual crops that are being grown here by area farms? Things that you wouldn't think of as being a New England farm?
well, I think that you've already mentioned a lot of the things that people might discover. Garlic scapes, that's the flowering top to the garlic plant. And they are edible and they taste like garlic. That actually is a relatively early thing that comes in, I think maybe June. And they have this kind of wild curly Q look to them. So that can be a really fun thing to taste. I just tend to use those as a stand-in for garlic, but they're not quite as pungent as garlic. So it's sort of a like garlic green bean or something. That's how I think about them. Um, there are farms locally that are growing ginger, which I think is hard to imagine as a local crop to the Northeast, but in greenhouses you can grow it. So you can get fresh young ginger in the early fall, and that you don't have to peel or anything. You just chop it up and use it as is. I like to buy that and put it in the freezer and use it throughout the year, and it's really tasty. Um, I think that people sometimes are surprised by the fact that we have peaches and plums and some of those really sweet, tender fruits grown locally, grapes. Um, People expect to find apples and pears at orchards and farmers markets locally, but maybe not some of those more southern identified things. But farms here do grow really amazing fruit. Um, and I think something else that I at least really look forward to, I don't know if this is an unexpected crop, but it's just pick your own season for strawberries and blueberries and that sort of thing. That comes early. Strawberries tend to start in June. And that feels like something to really look forward to.
I read a story in the Daily Hampshire Gazette a couple of years ago about a group of farmers that are specifically growing Asian vegetables that aren't native to the area to supply the
Hmm.
local restaurants. And I thought that's a very unique type of farm to have here in the valley. But
Yeah.
they've introduced a lot of leafy vegetables and things that are very common in Asian cuisine that you wouldn't find at the supermarket.
Right, yes. There are definitely farms that are growing specialty crops that are geared towards Asian cuisine. There are farms that are growing crops that are common in Puerto Rico. There's a, relatively large Puerto Rican population here, in Holyoke and other parts of the region. And so there are farms that are growing crops that are more familiar to people who grew up in Puerto Rico. We have farms that are growing radicchio and other kind of specialty bitter greens that you might not expect to find, and which are kind of special in a short season. And a lot of restaurants and, as you say, foodies like to look for those sorts of things. And yeah, I think that just going to your local farmers market or stopping by a local farm stand and just seeing what's there is a great way to see what the range is that's being grown here, because I think it's pretty surprising. The variety is surprising and the length of the season is surprising because you can really get local food year round here in the valley, starting with maple syrup and pretty much going all the way through with greenhouse crops and, not to mention the meat and cheese and maple syrup and honey and milk and all of those sorts of things that are available every day.
What kind of meat products come from the valley that people could be looking for?
Well, the basics are pretty much all available. You can get beef, pork, chicken, turkey. There are some farms that have lamb or mutton or even goat meat, which is very commonly eaten in other parts of the world. And a lot of them have the animals processed and turned into things like sausage and bacon and, deli meats and that sort of thing. So you can find locally raised and, locally processed meats that pretty much meet any standard need that a person would have.
Well, Claire, we need to take a very quick break to acknowledge our underwriters. And before we do, how can people learn more about CISA?
Information about CISA and about all of the farms and farmers markets that I've mentioned can be found at buylocalfood.org. That is our website.
We couldn't produce On the Mark and the other programs that originate here at Studio 120 without the help of many underwriters. So when you hear them mentioned, please thank them for sponsoring our programs. Ken Stomsky is our chief engineer. I'm Mark Auerbach. And if you missed a part of today's program, or you want to watch it again, or share it with friends, all of our stuff is archived on YouTube under WSKB Community Radio. And Claire and I get together at least twice a year to chat about CISA and farms. So you can go back over the last 3 or 4 years and catch some of our previous conversations about the good work that CISA does and the fact that we live in a great area that supplies us with a variety of product. Some of the things, you think about maple syrup, you may think about asparagus, but there are other unique things. There's a couple of nut farms in the valley.
Yes, that is a relatively new product. Well, new and old, because, of course, historically there have been nuts raised here. The American chestnut sort of famously was widespread and was struck down mostly by a virus. So yes, there are some farms that are reseeding the area with nuts and hoping to make that a more, sustainable, locally grown protein source for people. Still relatively new and hopefully something that will grow in the coming years.
Is our climate good for growing nuts? There are a lot of wild walnut trees or chestnut trees.
Black walnuts, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that there are a number of nut trees, and I think specifically chestnuts that grow quite well here. As long as you're able to grow a variety that is resistant to certain types of tree diseases that could strike them down. I think the climate is otherwise quite suitable.
One thing we didn't talk about is if you're going to a farmer's market or to a farm stand, and you're not sure about something, ask the farmer. Maybe they have a vegetable you've never seen before. Ask the farmer how to prepare it, because if you're innovative in your eating and you're open to new foods, a farmer knows how to prepare a particular vegetable or fruit or nut. And some of them have a variety of cheeses, for example, and you may not know what to pair it with, but the person that's producing the cheese can give you a great tour of the various things that they offer.
Yeah, that is one of the really great things about buying directly from local producers and local growers is that they really know what's in season, what's good, and they have a million ways to prepare everything. Regardless of what your taste is, they can give you some tips, which really makes it easy to try new things and to experiment.
Yeah, and I know some of the farms at this time of the year will sell you small plants or seedlings that they've grown in their greenhouse. So if you're a gardener and you want to add to your herb garden, or you want to grow tomatoes or peppers or chili or something like that. Many of the farm stands offer young plants.
Yes. Yeah. And I think one of the benefits of buying locally raised seedlings from a local farm is that they have been raised and usually hardened off, which is the process by which young plants are exposed to cooler temperatures. Not so cold that it kills them, but cool enough that it helps them to develop a little bit of resilience. They've been raised here and they've been sort of tempered in the climate here, and that makes them much more likely to survive the weather variation that we just tend to find in the Northeast. And the mention of seedlings reminds me to mention that HIP, which is the Healthy Incentives Program, I'm not sure if we've talked about that on this program together or not, but it is it's an instant rebate program that the state runs, which gives you an instant rebate when you use SNAP, formerly known as food stamps, to buy produce or seedlings from participating local farms and farmers markets. So it's a way to make it possible for our low-income neighbors to access fresh local produce or to grow it themselves by purchasing seedlings, and it provides a financial incentive that makes it a little bit more affordable for people. And there's information about HIP also on CISA's website, which is buylocalfood.org.
And that's important because we have food deserts in some of our cities where the only place to buy food is a corner store or a bodega, and they may not have fresh fruits and vegetables. So it offers somebody an opportunity to eat seasonally and eat organically and eat stuff that came right off the farm.
Yes, yep. And farmers markets, I think, can be a really important access point for people who live in some of those more urban areas, because they bring products from the farms surrounding into the heart of many of our local cities. So, and I think all of the farmers markets, all the summer markets have at least one vendor or they're set up themselves to accept SNAP, which is what food stamps is called now, and HIP also. So it's a really great program that, creates an important income stream for local farms and, helps people to eat fresh veggies, and we really want to spread the word about it because not enough people know about it, and it's just right there, available for folks to use. So.
Well, Claire, I'm glad you shared that. Give us the website one more time.
It is buylocalfood.org.
And are you on Facebook and Instagram?
Yep. We're on Facebook and Instagram. And I wanted to mention that we are doing a bike tour of local farms in early June on Sunday, June 2nd. It's going to be, family friendly, nothing too hardcore, but a great way to see a handful of local farms, taste some local food, and there's information about that at buylocalfood.org as well.
That sounds great. Claire Morenon, thank you for being here today. Always a pleasure to talk. And let's talk during the harvest season.
I'd love that.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break to acknowledge our underwriters. When we come back, you're going to meet Mamie Parris, who plays the title role in Goodspeed musicals The Mystery of Edwin Drood. You're going to learn about her theater career. She was on Broadway in Cats and other things, but also how she's overcome Bell's palsy, which could have stopped her career. Ken Stomsky's our chief engineer. I'm Mark Auerbach. We'll be back after these messages, so don't go away.
Support for the community programming of WSKB is provided by the Dunkin' Donuts shops of Westfield and the Sardina family. It's nice to know that even as the world changes, Dunkin' Coffee remains the same at 7 convenient locations throughout Westfield.
Hi, it's Bob Plass, and I have Wow, It's Tuesday every Tuesday, 6 to 8. Wow, it's Tuesday.
Community Radio.
89.5 WSKB.
I did it!
Live from Studio 120 at Westfield Technical Academy, this is WCPC Channel 15 and 89.5 FM, WSKB Westfield.
Welcome back to On the Mark, everyone. I'm your host, Mark Auerbach. Peter Coles is our chief engineer. And for this half hour, we're going down south of the border to Goodspeed Musicals, where The Mystery of Edwin Drood is playing through June 2nd. I'm glad to introduce to you Mamie Parris, who plays the title role in that musical. She's been on this program before, and this is her third Goodspeed musical. She did The Most Happy Fella, and then a Rodgers and Hammerstein review, and now The Mystery of Edwin Drood. Her Broadway credits include School of Rock, Cats, and On the 20th Century, which was the musical I first saw her in when she stood by for Kristen Chenoweth, and I became a Mamie Parris fanboy after that performance. Maybe it was incredible, and I still think about it.
Oh, thank you.
In Edwin Drood, which runs through June 2nd, it's based on a Charles Dickens novel, thriller, and he died before it was finished. So the musical tells the story, and at the point where Charles Dickens dies, the musical says, all right, audience, you get to pick who the killer is. And the last half hour of this musical, where the audience votes and the actors are down in the audience taking the ballots, is one of the funniest half hours of musical theater that I've seen. I was just so impressed.
Isn't it? It's really incredible, and that's one part of the show, which, without giving away any spoilers, of course, I'm not involved in. And it's just absolutely incredible to listen to every night. When we were in technical rehearsals and everybody was out there without an audience, it was so fun for me to watch. The gang out there taking those votes, it is such a unique experience. The audience just loves it. And I've never seen, this show is so unique, and I've never seen an audience warm up and open up to a show the way they do with this show. That by the end, I mean, you'd think they were out in the lobby, throwing back shots during the intermission. They're having such a good time. And for the most part, I think are completely sober.
Yeah, and I went to the press night where, all of us are sitting there with our notebooks, taking notes for our reviews and all of that. But across the aisle from us was another theater reporter that I know. And he's usually so busy writing notes that he doesn't watch what's going on necessarily. His notebook was closed, and he was on the floor laughing. I just think the last half hour was great. And it's a great cast. You're with Lenny Wolpe, who's done a lot of stuff from including The Drowsy Chaperone, and Liz McCartney, who I saw last year on Broadway in Funny Girl. It's just a whole great group of talented people.
Yeah, this cast is really incredible. When we were getting close to time to do the show, I had reached out to Rob Ruggiero, who's our director, who's a friend of mine, and I said, hey, do you want to give me a hint about who else is in the cast? I would love to know who else we've got. And he sent me this cast list that blew my mind. I mean, Lenny is incredible in this show. I worked with Lenny. My second Broadway show was The Drowsy Chaperone. I was a replacement, and he was we overlapped for a few weeks, and then he left to do Wicked. I worked with Liz McCartney in Wicked. We did the national tour together. She's brilliant. Paul Slade-Smith, who plays Reverend Chris Sparkle, we worked together. He's just a comic genius. Jamie Laverdiere, who plays Bazard, all these names that I had worked with and just adored. And it was just so exciting for me. And then to be in the room with all these people I didn't know who were wonderful. It's a really cool experience. They really nailed it with this cast. I think they got very, very lucky that these people were available. It's a good group.
And you've been at Goodspeed. This is your third time. What's special about Goodspeed for you?
I love coming here. There's something about, I'm so close to home because I live in New York, so I can go home on the weekends and be with my husband and my dog and my friends, which is lovely. But it's so nice to be up here in this little village, in this enclave, that really, it feels like an old-fashioned artist retreat that you used to read about in books that they had in the 20s and the 30s, where people would just go and create this incredible art, and the community supported it. And that's kind of what Goodspeed feels like to me. We're kind of in the middle of all these lovely hamlets. We're not far from Hartford. We're, of course, not far from New York, New Haven. We're near all these big cities and all these small hamlets full of people who are just ready to get out and support artistic endeavors. And, Goodspeed also, in addition to the main stage shows, which are generally better known, which are generally already produced, they have the Norma Terrace, where they produce and create new works. So you're always up here with new writing teams and people kind of creating these entirely new pieces. And it feeds your soul as an artist. It's always a good time.
And I would think that being on the river, it's spring. It was gorgeous yesterday in terms of everything is sprouting and green. And I love being there in the summertime when you can sit on the dock, or in the autumn when the leaves are changing color. I've been once in the winter, with
Oh.
snow on the ground, and it's even pretty then.
Really? That's great. This is I've done two other shows here, and they were both in the fall, which I love here. I mean, fall here is, of course, just gorgeous. So I was excited to be here when things are blooming instead of dying off. I think I'm really excited to get to the warm weather. It's been lovely. So it's been very rainy, but but what are you going to do? April showers bring May flowers,
So,
right?
so they say.
So they say.
In my garden is mud right now because we've had so much rain this year. You came out, so to speak, as somebody who is living with Bell's palsy. And in your playbill bio, you mentioned it, but I've heard you do another interview where you talked about it. And my question is, you've become an advocate for people who have Bell's palsy. Tell me your history with it. When were you diagnosed, and how did it impact your work?
Well, this time around, because interestingly, this is my second time having Bell's palsy. I had it when I was 22 years old, so an eon ago, or just yesterday, depending
Yes,
on who you
just
ask.
yesterday.
And that incident lasted about 6 months and actually left some, they call it synkinesis, when it doesn't quite heal the same way on the right side of my face. But it was nothing most people could tell. I knew about it. I always got photographed from the other side because I thought that was my better side. Then this past December, I was performing with these wonderful symphony orchestras and holiday concerts, and I got very, very ill with just like a respiratory virus, a chest cold that was going around. I had to miss a couple of shows, took medicine, was on the Mucinex and all that stuff. And by Christmas time, I was doing a lot better. So right after Christmas, I flew home. I had been home for a day, and I had a day where my tongue was numb. It felt like maybe I burned it on hot coffee. And I thought, oh, maybe I drank something too hot and I'd forgotten about it. I don't know. And the next day, I saw the signs of Bell's palsy that I was familiar with, having had it 20 years ago. In that I woke up and my face felt a little different, and I looked in the mirror and tried to smile and could see that now the left side of my face was not cooperating. Then gradually, over the course of about 48 hours, I lost all movement on the left side of my face. It's, of course, scary. It was not as scary the second time around because I wasn't worried I was having a stroke. I'd experienced this before, and I thought I knew what it was. I immediately saw a doctor and got the diagnosis. So that was January 1st. That was the first day of this year. Since then, I've seen neurologists. Since it was a second incidence, they wanted to check out my brain just in case. Everything's fine. It looks like a similar incident where I had a virus, and the virus moved from my chest to my temple. And interestingly, I read studies that say that about 75% of cases of Bell's palsy are literally people who have a chest cold. And for whatever reason, all bodies are wired slightly differently. It moves into this, it's called the cranial nerve number 7. You have one on each side that controls that hemisphere of the face. This time around, it was a little different from last time. Last time I had it, I had no pain whatsoever. It didn't infringe upon what the trigeminal nerve, which is the nerve that feels things. This time, that numbness of the tongue was the first indication that it also involved the trigeminal nerve. So unluckily, I had a lot of really terrible pain I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. And luckily, I saw a neurologist. I was able to get on some medications that took care of that. And eventually that wore off and that nerve has already healed. So that's no longer an issue, which is great. So now it's just about healing. 90% of people who get Bell's palsy do regain full or almost full movement of that side of the face. It just takes time, and there's no real timeline. For some people, it's a few weeks. For some people, it's many months. So that's where we are now. It's been, since January 1st, or since I think New Year's Eve is when it first started. So it's been almost 4 months. And I'm seeing a lot of progress from where it first began. Anyone who follows me on social media or would like to, I've talked about it a lot on Instagram and TikTok and detailed my progress along the way because, like any visible disability or illness that affects people visibly, it can make you very self-conscious. And I think a lot of people don't want to talk about it because who wants to be on camera? Who wants to be making posts when they don't feel like they look their best? And I, as an actor, I kind of went into hiding for a couple of months and then I said, this is ridiculous. I'm the same person, with the same skills, with the same, I'm still here. I just look a little different. And I think it's time we talked about it because it's more common than we think. I've met so many people and spoken with so many people now who have either had Bell's palsy or someone they know or love has experienced it. It's been really interesting to find this community.
And is it difficult as a public person to reveal this kind of information publicly the way you have? I had kidney failure and a massive heart attack back in July, and I decided as a public figure to come out about it because maybe somebody can learn or be more assured what they're going through if they hear it from me rather than from a doctor or a WebMD article and stuff like that.
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, you look great. You would never know.
Well, and you look great.
Congratulations on your recovery.
And I sat on the aisle and you were singing in front of me. And because I knew that you had Bell's palsy, I was looking for signs and I did not see it.
Oh, thank you. It's really, things are really starting to heal and I'm starting to see it more. But I agree, speaking out about these things really takes away stigma, it's especially when it comes to health, like with kidney failure, with a heart attack, we're so used to people saying that you should own some of the blame for that, for I should own some of the, maybe I wasn't healthy enough, maybe, and everybody wants to give advice, take more vitamin C, take more vitamin D, take more zinc, take more this. I don't know about you. I'm a very healthy person. I work out, I eat right, I don't, and it's time that we stepped away from anyone feeling shame about an illness or a disability that is out of our control. It's time that we talked about those things and said, this is where I am right now. The bottom line is, and I think post-pandemic, we all kind of acknowledge it and see it more, is we're all constantly being a little bit damaged and or healing at the same time. We're all healing, whether it's from something in the past, something psychological, something physical. We're all on a healing journey, not to get too hippy-dippy about it. So I think it's important that we all kind of acknowledge that and say, hey, I see what you're going through. I'm going through something as well. I think it's good we can interact and we can have this conversation and maybe we can grow from it. I think that's really important. And I've been pleased that when I started talking about it on social media, it was partly for me because I said, I'm not going to hide this. I'm just going to get out there and say, this is what's going on. But it was also because, like you, I saw people online talking about it and it made me feel so much better than, like you said, a WebMD article or something, to see a human being saying, this is what I look like. This is how I feel. This is what I'm going through. And I wanted to be one of those people who could hopefully shed some light and tell people, look, this is just for now. We can do anything just for now. I hope it's helping.
Well, I'm sure it is. How did it impact your voice? Because you have a really powerhouse of a voice that can be delicate or belt. And I know that when I speak, I use my facial muscles. So how did it impact your singing?
That's a question I get a lot. And very fortunately, it did not affect my voice at all. Usually this condition doesn't really affect people as far as, their larynx, their vocal box, any of that stuff. What it does affect, of course, is your resonance, your intonation here, your ability to create space and vowels and all that kind of thing. I'm fortunate that I've been singing for a really long time. I've had really, really great teachers. So I feel like my technique is pretty solid. So there wasn't a lot of effect on my voice. I had to lose several gigs and jobs I had lined up for a couple of months because I just looked so different. I didn't want it to be a distraction. And B, it really affected a lot of my enunciation at the beginning. Plosives, P's, B's, F's, are sibilants like F's and thes now have improved so much with so much of my musculature coming back. But at the beginning, when you have absolutely no musculature working on that side, gravity just pulls and pulls and pulls and pulls and can make it very difficult to speak correctly, to just to feel like you can speak and sing the way you want to. But luckily, no, my voice was not affected at all, and as my those signals start to come back to my face and I'm seeing the improvement, it's interesting. I'm also feeling and sometimes hearing the improvement. And it's so small. I don't know that it would come across to anyone who does not hear me sing every day of my life. But even now, the other day I was singing The Writing on the Wall, the final number of the piece, and I could hear my resonance had shifted just a little bit, that I had a little more control over the muscles on the inside of the side of my face. And I was able to maneuver it a little differently and it was easier. And I was like, oh, this is great. The more it comes back, the easier and easier it's going to be. So I've been lucky. I've been able to sing through it. And that's music is healing, especially to me. So it's been really, really nice to do.
Yeah, I know that feeling because when I had the surgeries this summer and then in January, I had to be intubated for anesthesia. And I said, I need to talk to the anesthesiologist first. I use my voice every day for work. I'm a trained singer, but in radio and television, I have to modulate my voice. And if you intubate it and you nick a vocal cord, you could end my career. And the anesthesiologist at Mass General said, well, I've worked with singers and broadcasters, and I can't, because of HIPAA, tell you who they are. But one singer was the famous opera star Beverly Sills, and she had no problem. So I felt very confident going in. But I had to work to get my voice back, and I'm always conscious of it. Not necessarily on the air because I have a great engineer, but if I'm doing a public speech or I'm standing in front of a crowd or using a handheld mic. And I never forget how my voice has changed since the surgery and how to work around it. So I think we both share that, thank God we have good technique to start with, but then to bring it back.
Yeah, I mean, it's so true. Intubation is so hard on you, and I commend you for being able to get back to full health, and your anesthesiologist and everybody involved, because that's so scary as someone who, makes a living using their voice, that's important to them. And that's been, I'm sure for you as well, returning to your line of work, returning to my line of work after any health issue is so different than people who can go to the office every day. And it's difficult for everyone, but when your body is your instrument, when your voice or your face is a part of how you earn your living, of how people know you, it's such a big part of your identity that those kinds of things can really affect you in vast ways. It can take a long time to really fully heal.
And it's funny. I mean, I have a lot of self-confidence in what I do. I'm sure you do as well with your credits and all. But when you come back after an illness, for me, my self-confidence was on the line. I mean, I was really worried how people would accept me.
Absolutely. And for me as well, I've been so fortunate to have a really terrific career so far. I've been able to make a living doing what I love. Not a lot of people can say that. It's wonderful. And when something like this happens and you lose such a distinct part of who you are, and what I look like is such a big part of what I do, that it's incredibly scary. And I mean, especially at the beginning of this, I really went through a lot of issues. I've talked about it a bit on social media with mental health and depression and the fear of going, okay, what do I do if I can't do this anymore? What do I do if I can't do this anymore?
Yeah, that was the same thing.
It's a scary thing.
That was the same thing with me when I thought, what if I have to give this up? What will my life be like? And it made me fight more and become more aware to get through the difficulty in getting back on my feet. But
agreed, 100% the same. It's one of the reasons I'm here at Good Speed, because I was faced with this possibility of staying under the radar for another 3 months. And luckily, my director, Rob Ruggiero, and Donalyn Hilton here, the artistic director, they were so great about saying, we want you to come. We're willing to gamble on this. If you think you can do it and it's not going to be difficult for you and it's not going to be painful for you, we want you here. And it really has, working through it has kept me going. It's really kept me going without, wallowing in the mire.
I really commend you for speaking out. I think it's a very important thing that those of us that have some kind of an illness or affliction speak out, just so other people know I'm not the only one.
Absolutely.
There are other people
you never
out there.
want, yeah, you never want people to feel alone. I'm with you there. It's something scary like this, and if you don't know people who've gone through it, if it hasn't come into your life ever, and something happens like this that you don't know anything about, and with Bell's palsy at least, there's a dearth of information on the internet. There've been very few studies. There are a lot of contradictory opinions on things. So I think especially with this condition, it's so great to hear directly from people who are going through it, to say, this is what worked for me, this is what helped me heal, this is what helped me mentally heal. I think it's so vitally important.
Well, Mamie, before we go, if people want to learn more about your journey, how can they follow you on Instagram or TikTok or Facebook?
Sure. I'm not on Facebook anymore. I was one of those things during the pandemic, I said, this is not good for my health. And so I left it. But I am on Instagram. I'm at Mamie Parris Official, MAMIE Official. I'm on TikTok as Mamie Sings, MAMIE Sings. And I try to post, at least every couple of weeks if I can, and just let people know how it's going so they can see any changes I've made and what the process has been like. And it's really been lovely to connect with people there. I hope if anybody has any more questions, they can feel free to reach out there and ask.
Mamie, thanks for being here today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I'm so glad you got to see the show last night.
Oh, I loved it. My review will be out next week, but I just loved it.
Oh, good.
And if you want to see Mamie in The Mystery of Edwin Drood, you can find out ticket information and bios and everything else at goodspeed.org. And that's Goodspeed Musicals down in East Haddam, Connecticut, about an hour and 10 minutes down the road from us. And this wraps up another edition of On the Mark. Peter Coles has been our chief engineer. I'm Mark Auerbach, and we're going to leave you with some music from The Mystery of Edwin Drood, and we'll see you next week on another edition of On the Mark.